Costin here with a discussion about the Plague factions in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And what I want to talk about in this specific video is how well these specific factions handle using plagues in their campaign. It's not strictly about the legendary lords or the race, though obviously those do have an impact. It's more so, are plagues meaningful to use in a campaign in any way, shape, or form for these campaigns? And starting at number 5, we have Epidemius. In theory, yes, plagues are a vital portion of his campaign, but in practice, he almost never actually gets to use said plagues. The reason being that when we're looking at his campaign mechanic, he doesn't really have the benefits needed in order to make the plague mechanic work. So his faction effects do not support that. They support Plague Bearers and Exalted Plague Bearers of Nurgle, as well as campaign movement range for Plague Cultists. So great, you can get Plague Cultists closer to a target. That's about it. That's as far of a plague benefit as you will get. You can gain powerful rewards based on the number of plagues on non-Nurgle factions, but the problem is you have to spread plagues to different factions in order to get these kind of benefits. The research rate is pretty useful, as is being able to summon Exalted Plague Bearers in, or sorry, not the Exalted Plague Bearers, to use this specific blessing, or summoning a Great Unclean One to be sure. But at the same time, you're rarely, if ever, going to get the entire faction effect over here with Epidemius. And therein lies the major issue in his campaign. His faction effect, his special effect, might as well not actually exist. On top of that, obviously he does have some nice benefits here and there, like Plague Immunity Duration -1 turn for all future plagues, but even if you're trying to do plagues as cheaply as possible, it will actually affect your unit recruitment because you're using the same resource for unit recruitment. You're using infections in order to achieve the spreading of plague. But you can't have it both ways. You can't have both plagues and a good amount of armies, and generally speaking, if I'm playing a Nurgle campaign, unless I absolutely have to use plagues, I would not really go down the path of going for it. It's just better to get a bunch of mortal units. Like, would you rather have an army of Chosen of Nurgle, or would you rather have a plague effect that affects the enemy and just mildly annoys them? I know what my answer is, but let me know what you guys think on this subject. Next up, we have Kugath Plague Fodder, who actually has the same problem as Epidemius. In fact, in his situation, it's kind of a bit worse, but also better. Because you see, he doesn't have a faction effect that's tied, or a special skill tied to him spreading plagues all around. His plagues are just better, and that's the reason he is actually higher on this list. But similar problem. Kugath desperately needs to recruit a military because he's going to be up against Gorst, he's going to be up against Greasus, and he's also going to be up against Grimgor potentially in a campaign. So getting a hold of all of those as quickly as possible would be an ideal situation for Kugath, as opposed to spending his limited infections on plagues. Yes, the plagues can be stronger, definitely, but that means you can just benefit from a couple of plagues. This is the reason why it's better to play, if you're going to look at the Nurgle campaign where you want to benefit from the plagues, it's better to play that situation with Kugath. You're just not going to be spamming plagues all around the world. And even the buffed plagues themselves are not necessarily going to be as beneficial in a long campaign compared to, say, getting things like Contagious Horde and Fattening Seeds. Those are genuine benefits in a campaign compared to what any plague can provide you. Like, you can get the plague that gives you growth, absolutely. You can also just get population surplus +1 for newly captured settlements. And kind of funny also is that it increases the chance of plague spreading. So eventually you will have enough infections if you have enough armies. But the way Nurgle campaigns work is that it heavily incentivizes you to use plague sparingly in the early game, and by the time you can actually use them in any meaningful sense of the word in a campaign, your campaign is effectively over. At number 3, we have Tamurkhan, the Maggot Lord. And with Tamurkhan, you don't really need to use plagues, but you will benefit quite a bit from using them. And there's a couple of factors that come in play with respect to this. First off, Nurgle can get a huge amount of heroes, and Tamurkhan, with all the chieftains, he has even more heroes than usual. So that means you don't rely on the unit recruitment situation as much as the other campaigns, because you will have all of these hero types, and you do start with a tier 2 settlement. You can sell the initial income building, though you might be playing the only Nurgle campaign where actual money might end up being a problem. It's due to the starting position of the campaign here, really. But then we consider the heroes, we consider the chieftains, and then we consider getting units for the chieftains. And one of those, the one you actually start with, is Kask. And you do need to level up Kask, and the best way of doing so as quickly as possible is to create as many plagues as possible, and also use a couple of tricks like sacking Warriors of Chaos or Norska settlements several times over in order to increase that level of fealty, so you can actually achieve that goal of getting him aligned and unlocking the other chieftains. So you have a benefit in using plagues early on, but then later on, once you have finished that aligned level, you can kind of use them whatever you want, and you can use plagues in order to to reduce the upkeep, because you can have some very expensive units in your army. You at least have units. That is a pretty big benefit to consider in a campaign. So while the plagues Tamurkhan has are not necessarily going to give him any special buffs, they are going to end up being at least somewhat useful. More so for the buffing effect rather than any kind of downside on the enemy. If you're relying on plagues to hurt your enemy, I don't think that's really going to work out in a Warhammer free campaign in any way, shape, or form, really, based on the things we've seen in the game so far. We have Lord Skrolk of the Skaven. Bet you didn't expect this specific race to end up on this list. But the Skaven plague in itself is quite devastating and achieves a couple of things at the same time that honestly put it above most of the Nurgle plagues, really. Even when you combine several of the Nurgle plagues together, and even beyond that. Because let's consider the Skaven plague over here. Vigor loss reduction minus 50% for a number of select units. Casualty replenishment decreased by 5%. It's not comparable to what Nurgle gets, but you also get frenzy, leadership, growth, construction time for buildings by 33%, which is pretty damn significant, and income to all buildings. And that's just the positive effect. The negative effect is that all units suffer attrition from the plague among enemies. Leadership is reduced by 9, growth is reduced by 30, and income from all buildings is reduced by 50%. Reducing the growth of AI settlements is not necessarily a benefit, as one might think, because you kind of want them to grow settlements the higher the settlements are. Yes, the garrison might be stronger, but usually that's not really going to be a problem, especially for minor settlements. Hell, you know, if you can take a tier 4 settlement from the AI, that's great, sure. The downside is the AI might get it. The thing, however, that sets the Skaven Plague apart is that while it cannot be controlled in the same way the Nurgle one can, it does tend to spread fairly far and wide. So over here, you summon it with the Pestilence Scheme, and obviously Skrolk has a benefit to this one, and you summon it with the Pestilence Scheme, and then it starts spreading quite rapidly. Compared to Nurgle plagues, I would say this beats even a maxed out plague in terms of just the sheer level of potential, as well as the spread that this thing does. Like, if Epidemius had a plague of this kind of level, it would be far deadlier. Of course, there is a chance it can fail, but my personal experience so far with the Skaven Plague, with the Pestilence Scheme, is that it generally spreads quite very, very far. And that's the reason Skrolk is at number 2 for plague campaigns. And finally, at number 1, we have Festus, the Liege Lord of the Warriors of Chaos. Though he is really a Nurgle campaign without the issues of Nurgle. Of course, Warriors of Chaos do have their own problems, but the main benefit that Festus does have is he gains infections from battles, but he doesn't have to spend them on unit recruitment because he has Warriors of Chaos unit recruitment. And that is one of the principal benefits in his campaign with regards to spreading the plague around. And he also gains it from occupying settlements. Again, another tangible benefit in this specific campaign with regards to infections. I mean, all Nurgle campaigns do gain it through those methods, but that's what sets... this is what sets Festus apart. Of course, he also gains a lot of different benefits through the Gifts of Chaos, and specifically when you consider Bloom of Decay, that beats any Nurgle plague out of the water, so you don't necessarily have to worry about the same kind of things with settlements as other Nurgle campaigns, so you can focus your benefits more for the military aspect than anything else, and that could be useful in terms of leveling up your Marauders. I mean, yes, there is a plague that reduces construction time by 50% for all buildings. It's pretty damn important when you think about it, really. But you combine the benefits of Warriors of Chaos, and you combine that with the other things that you get over here from this campaign. So, for instance, if we look at his Lord effect, his Plague Direction increases +3 turns army in province. Then on top of that, casualties post-battle, so that's more infections, though it's limited to 100, of course. I really think CA should give you more baseline infections from battle, like easily double and increase the limit to 200 or 150. But it's kind of weird to have a limit if you're going up against massive armies. But anyway, infection cost to create a plague, minus 25%. Then chance of spreading a plague, plus 15%. And that's really what makes Festus stand out as a legendary lord of Nurgle, really. And he ends up having the best plague campaign in the game as a result of it. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.